What is it? Hakuyu said. Her expression showed her displeasure at this show of impropriety. Could you remain here? Maomao asked. To what end? She continued. I would like you to hear this conversation. Hakuyu's expression did not change. Hongyang stepped into the hallway and waved down Alan, who happened to be passing by. Please watch the child, she said. She took the prince from Hakuyu and gave him to Alan. The child burbled and pulled on Alan's hair. She carried him off with a strained smile. Do you have something in mind, Maomao? Empress Jayukayu asked. Neither she nor Hongyang said anything about Hakuyu's continued presence. They figured it would be quicker to simply forge ahead with the discussion. This, she said, and held out the Empress's hair stick. Have you figured out who was behind its disappearance? Jayukayu asked. I'm afraid not, ma'am. But I believe I can explain why it became blemished and why the stone inside disappeared. You mean it? Yes, ma'am. Maomao took out the diagram Yinghua had drawn the night before. You retired to your palace to change outfits, correct? And it was while you were doing so that you realized the hair stick was missing. That's right. Unfortunately, there was no time to look for it. I had to get changed. I thought so. The commotion did not happen when the hair stick disappeared. Did you think perhaps you had simply dropped it rather than it being stolen? Yes, I was in such a hurry. A branch brushed my head as I walked past. I thought perhaps it fell out then. Would that have been around here? Maomao asked, pointing to a spot on the diagram. Yes, right there. There was a stand directly in my way. As I tried to go around it, the branch caught me. A platform, in other words, the stewpot, Maomao suspected. She glanced over at Hakuyu, but the other woman's expression remained unchanged. Maybe I am wrong about this, she thought, but either way, having Hakuyu there would make things quicker. To make a long story short, I believe the hair stick was not stolen. I think it simply fell. What do you mean? Asked Jayukayu. Precisely that. Milady, the reason for your distress is that you believe your hair stick was stolen and then returned to you as a threat. The hair stick is discolored, and the stone it held is missing, as if to say this is what will happen to you. Any noble who sees clouded silver will immediately think of poison. Wouldn't you feel much better if you knew that neither of those things was intentional? I suppose so. Furthermore, milady, am I wrong in thinking you have some idea what happened to the stone? Empress Jayukayu twirled some hair around a fingertip. Her eyes were full of emotion. Get to the point, please. What happened to the stone that was in the hair stick? Hongyang demanded, finally unable to wait any longer. Empress, do you have any more of those stones? Maomao said. I guess I have to explain everything eventually, Jayukayu said, resigned. She stood and fetched a small box from a corner of the room. She opened the box to reveal a translucent, many-faceted crystal. May I use this? Maomao asked. You were the one who gave it to me. Maomao picked up the stone in one hand and a carafe of water in the other. Could somebody please get me a vessel? Hakuyu brought a bowl. Maomao placed the stone in the bowl and then filled it with water. It's melting, Hongyang said. Perhaps you would like to try a sip, although I warn you, you may cringe because that is salt. Salt? Hongyang really had not known. If she had, she never would have allowed the Empress to use the faux crystal in her hair stick. Lady Jayukayu, what is going on? She exclaimed. Well, it was very pretty. And nobody noticed, did they? A mischievous smile came over the Empress's face. It suited her much better than grim anxiety. I never knew salt could take on such a fine form, Hakuyu said, observing the dissolving crystal. It often does not. I selected the crystals that had formed into the most appealing shapes. To begin, you add some salt to boiling water, but not too much, allowing it all to dissolve. Then you let the water cool. You need to place something small inside to act as a core. Finally, you let all the water evaporate. As you repeat the process, the crystal gradually gets bigger. I suppose the important thing to note is that silk is the ideal material for the thread from which you hang it. Maomao, you even made that while you were in the Jade Pavilion? Hongyang asked. Maomao didn't say anything. She could not be angry with Maomao now, could she? The time for being upset had passed. All right, so the stone dissolved. It is gone, Hongyang said. But what about the discolored silver? A great many things can cause silver to grow cloudy, Maomao said, drawing a small circle in a corner of the diagram. Eggs, for example. Eggs, the other three women looked at her puzzled. That's right. Do you know the smell a rotten egg gives off? All three of them shook their heads. It was the maids who took out the garbage. They had probably never smelled the odor of rot before. Maomao decided to try a different analogy. She said, how about boiled eggs? Do you know how those smell? Gyuko said, that I know. He continued, it's a rather unique aroma, but you can smell the same thing at certain hot springs. The Empress said, oh, I know what you mean. She must have bathed in a hot spring previously. Perhaps there was one or two on the journey from the western capital to this city. Certain substances in those springs contain sulfur. Boiled eggs do too, and if you eat them with silverware, the utensils can become discolored. Yes, of course, Hongyang said. She looked as though she couldn't believe she hadn't thought of it before. She now had a good idea why the hair stick had darkened. She knew what had been served at the garden party. The hair stick dropped into a pot of boiled eggs, Maomao said. The salt crystal dissolved in the water and the eggs discolored the silver. It probably also explained why Lihaku had found the soup so unbearably salty. But how did the hair stick end up in the pot? Gyuko wondered. Do you suppose it simply fell in there by chance? I'm afraid I don't know. It could have been coincidence or someone could have put it in there. Why in the world would they do that? Hakuyu asked, squinting at Maomao. Suppose someone is preparing a meal when they find an ornate hair stick. Then, a lady in waiting appears and asks if they've seen just such a hair stick anywhere. What do you think they would do? Would they immediately hold it up and say, is this what you're looking for? Or might they try to play dumb? Or a third possibility, Maomao said, they might panic and try to hide it somewhere. Hakuyu said, you're suggesting that before they knew what they were doing, they would have thrown it into the cookpot in front of them. Yes, Maomao said, although she felt somewhat guilty about the vague nature of her hypothetical situation. So the hair stick ended up in the pot, whether intentionally or accidentally. But when it was taken out, the silver was clouded and the stone was gone. It was hardly a state in which it could simply be returned. Just a moment, Hongyang asked. If one of the servants found it, wouldn't it be quite difficult for them to give it back? Indeed it would. So they came to the matter of how the hair stick had made its way back to the Empress. I don't believe a mere servant could have hidden the hair stick among a delivery of gifts to you. They must have had help. That was when the hair stick, which had seemed simply lost, began to look like a threat. Maomao could not be sure what had happened, but she had her suspicions. This is why she had Hakuyu stay in the room. She had been watching the other woman closely, but she had seen nothing unusual in her appearance or behavior. Perhaps her poker face was simply very good, or maybe she really did not know anything. Could one of the ladies in waiting, someone who served the Empress, have found the hair stick near the palace? Someone in that position could easily have tucked the hair stick into a delivery. Maomao was virtually certain that one of Gyuko's own ladies had returned the hair stick. She must have known the distress it would cause to get the accessory back in such a state. Hongyang would have reported the matter directly to Gyuko. She knew the Empress well enough to know that she wouldn't need to fear some arbitrary punishment. The same was true for Yinghua, Gyuan and Alan. All three of them knew about the salt crystal. They could have explained what happened and had no reason to hide anything. But what about Hakuyu? Considering her position, one might have expected her to simply be honest and report the hair stick to Gyuko. She knew the Empress was gracious. She would be unlikely to mete out harsh punishment over one ruined hair stick. There had to be some reason she had chosen not to come forward. It's almost as if one of the ladies in waiting deliberately returned the hair stick without saying anything. This was in order to make the Empress think she was being threatened, Maomao said. What do you mean? Hongyang asked, disturbed. Exactly what I said. Empress Gyuko is a kind and cheerful woman. Personally, I like her very much, but I could see someone thinking she is too soft to survive in this den of iniquity. Maomao looked at Hakuyu. She had considered the possibility that another palace-serving woman had been involved. However, when she looked at Yinghua's list of people who had been around the Empress during the garden party, she saw no names she didn't recognize. It had been only the classic 4 women and the trio of sisters. I see what this is about, said Empress Gyuko. A touch of frustration was in her voice. She slowly turned to Hakuyu. It was a warning to make me mind my behavior. That way those around me might not take me too lightly. She had said precisely what was on Maomao's mind. The Empress appeared to have her own idea about who the culprit was. She said, "You did not do it, did you, Hakuyu? And I know Seki you wouldn't dare." Gyukayu continued, "Which leaves Kokuyu," Hakuyu said. Her voice showed no emotion as she spoke her sister's name. "Kokuyu." "But why?" said Hongyang. She sounded surprised, but Gyukayu looked as if everything made sense to her. "I think it must have to do with the letter I received the other day," she said. "Kokuyu was the one who brought it to me." "Oh," exclaimed Hakuyu. "Letter? Had someone sent the Empress a threatening message?" Maomao wondered if it came from a political enemy. She briefly considered Consort Lihua, who also had a young son, but she quickly dismissed the idea, thinking it was not her. Perhaps it was the former heir apparent, His Majesty's younger brother Jinchi. Really, it was not likely. But then, what about Hakuyu and her sisters? No one would accuse them of being less than devoted to Empress Gyukayu. However, one thing set them apart from her longer-serving ladies. "If I may ask a question of Lady Hakuyu," Maomao said. "Did you think perhaps that Master Jinchi stole the hair stick and then returned it?" After a grudging pause, Hakuyu said, "Well, doesn't that seem obvious?" "Hakuyu, I told you that he of all people would never do such a thing." Gyukayu had a sad smile on her face. She knew very well he had no interest in the succession. Hongyang, Yinghua and the others were also familiar enough with Jinchi to know he wouldn't make threats like that. Maomao was fully aware that Jinchi saw his own status as simply a burden. That was why she had deliberately approached Hakuyu with her supposition. "You think that the way she acts means it is only a matter of time before some unsavory person insinuates themselves with Lady Gyukayu," Maomao said. "I'm sorry, but yes, I do," Hakuyu said. It was hard to miss that she was looking at Maomao. Hongyang looked scandalized. "Really? Is that where she is taking this?" Maomao thought, feeling a little uncomfortable. "Lady Gyukayu needs to realize there are enemies all around her," Hakuyu said. "I do understand that," Gyukayu said, "but it is no reason to show my fangs even to my friends." "Say, Hakuyu, is this something you heard from your father?" "No, ma'am, I thought of it on my own." She turned her almond-shaped eyes on the Empress. "But are you saying that even Master Gyukuo can be trusted?" Gyukuo, that was a new name to Maomao, although she assumed he was a relative of Gyukayu's. "What was in that letter he sent you?" Hakuyu pressed. "I see." "Kokuyu must have secretly read it," Gyukayu said. Her head drooped. "So Kokuyu stole a look at a letter? What is going on here?" It was all over Maomao's head, but this Gyukuo was evidently someone to watch out for. "He is my older brother. He did not write anything out of line," said the Empress. Maomao was aware of Gyukayu's older brother. She knew that he was in charge of the lands to the west while their father was in the capital. The eccentric strategist's former aide, Rikusen, had been sent westward for Gyukuo's benefit, but it looked like something was going on here. Hakuyu asked, "Are you so sure he is not a villain?" "Surely you know who continually came up with reasons not to send you new serving women as the number of your ladies in waiting dwindled one by one." That startled Maomao, but Hakuyu wasn't finished. "If we hadn't come, milady, you wouldn't be able to live as befits your station." There was force in her voice, unlike her usual detached demeanor. "Maybe I should excuse myself." Maomao thought, this did not concern her and it might have been best to leave, but try as she might, she could not find an appropriate way to exit. If Empress Gyukayu would not tell her what was in the letter, she would guess. Before she left the western capital, she learned that Master Gyukuo had adopted a young foreign woman. It has been over a year now. That is more than enough time for her to acquire the refinements expected of a well-bred young lady. "Hakuyu, Lady Hongyang, I will not go about furtively as Kokuyu did. I will speak my mind. I do not care if Master Gyukuo is Master Gyukuan's son or Lady Gyukayu's older brother. I do not trust him. He is trying to send a young woman who looks exactly like Lady Gyukayu to the rear palace. Why, imagine if she gained the affections of both His Majesty and the Crown Prince. Then something happened to our mistress. It was pure speculation, what she had said, yet it was by no means outside the realm of possibility. My father would never allow it, Gyukayu said. Master Gyukuan is certainly more than intelligent enough to see through Master Gyukuo's feeble scheming, Hakuyu said. Hongyang looked relieved. There is no problem then. His keen insight is the problem. Master Jayukyuan will certainly support whoever he believes will bring him the greatest benefit, Hakuyu said, her voice hollow. Just as he did when he destroyed the Yi clan. The Yi clan, they had formerly been one of the named clans and had ruled over the western reaches. This continued until they incurred the wrath of the Empress Regnant and were annihilated. We owe you so much, Lady Jayukayu. One reason we serve you here is in order to protect you. Master Jayukyuan is not my ruler, nor is his son. There was a fire in Hakuyu's eyes as she spoke. Maomao wondered what she had seen in her life, but she could only imagine. It wasn't her place to press or pry. Please be careful of Master Jayukuo. I'm begging you, I'm asking you with all my heart. Hakuyu's gaze went slowly to Maomao. Please surround yourself with people you trust. You never know what may happen. Jayukayu and Hongyang likewise looked at Maomao. She said, "Why is everyone?" She had a bad feeling about this that wouldn't go away. Maom. I do hope you will consider it, Jayukayu said. Her eyes were like a puppy's. You wouldn't want to see Lady Jayukayu get poisoned, would you? Hongyang asked with a slight smile. The world is a rough place, Hakuyu added, but there are people who would never betray a trust. Was she part of this plan? Maomao deliberately avoided looking at any of them, but she felt they were close to discovering her secret. Chapter 14, The Go Contest, Part 1. Maomao firmly slapped the bandages. The autumn breeze caught the drying white strips of cloth, and they fluttered against the clear blue sky. The weather seemed quite different from the clouds that darkened Maomao's heart. She had felt she could not simply leave Empress Jayukayu's palace on such an uncertain note. She had been saved by a message from Dr. Liu. He could be hard on his subordinates, but he also looked out for them. Maomao hadn't realized the Empress was so cornered. It wasn't by some obvious political enemy, but by a member of her own family. Her older brother. She'd heard that the Empress was the daughter of a concubine. Jayukyuan was an old man. Therefore, Jayukayu's half-brother Jayukuo must have been considerably older than she was. Complicated family relations were hardly unusual among the nobility. It seemed Jayukayu was no exception. I wonder what happens after this. Hakuyu had said Jayukyuan had his own games he was playing. He would be Empress Jayukayu's ally only as long as there was something in it for him. So what would happen if she lost the Emperor's affections? Or what if something should happen to the Crown Prince? Even if you are not interested in power, there are times when you need it to survive, Maomao thought. She sighed as she plunged her hands into the freezing water. The cold felt as though her fingertips would fall off. The weather would only become colder, making work with the water even more unpleasant. Nen devotedly applied balm to her young mistress Yao, protecting her skin from chapping. As she looked at the blue sky, Maomao had a thought. She wondered what that picture was about. It was the eerie image drawn by the little girl Jazgul. That reminded her that the shrine maiden from the west was still living in Li. How was she doing? It was good enough, no doubt, with the former consort Ardu to look after her. However, Maomao reflected that Ardu seemed destined to take all the country's dark secrets upon herself. Her home was a haven for the surviving Shi clan children. It was also a haven for Suhari, who, though unrecognized, was the granddaughter of the former emperor and the niece of the current one. And now the shrine maiden of Shao, who everyone thought was dead, was there as well. Arduo, the beauty who dressed like a man, took all of this in stride. But how did it appear to those around her? In one sense it did not seem to matter. All these things were done in complete secrecy, and they wouldn't be discovered easily. But there were plenty of people with sharp noses in the court. She hoped none of them would catch her scent. With that thought in her mind, Maomao poured the last of the water from the bucket into a canal. There isn't a full day's work to do here, Dr. Liu groaned. It was an hour when the medical office would normally have been full of injured soldiers, but today it was deserted. What can we do? Said the young doctor Tianyu. Everyone is playing hooky, starting with the head honcho himself. He wore a sarcastic smile, but he looked disappointed. In his hand he held a go book. Many civil officials are cutting work today. Maomao heard there were real brawls about who would get to take the day off. At least the soldiers can pretend they are going over to keep an eye on things. Tianyu himself had been desperate to get the day off, but he ended up here at work. A minimum staff was always needed in the medical offices, so physicians found it harder than most to take vacations. Seeing as there is pretty much nothing to do, I could probably just go home, couldn't I? Tianyu asked. But that sort of wheedling would not fly with Dr. Liu. Since we have finally got some time on our hands, we should use it to mix up some medicines and replenish our supply. The elderly doctor had a nasty grin on his face. He was enjoying turning the screws. Maomao's eyes lit up at the mention of making medicines. What should we make, sir? She said. Ahem. Yes, I am sorry to take the wind out of your sails when you have finally found some enthusiasm, but he held out a cloth-wrapped package. I need you to deliver this for me. Maomao immediately scowled. I know that look.